This conference will now be recorded.
Good
Well, good
morning,
morning.
everyone.
Good morning. This is Matt Schwartz. I'm chair of the Worksite Wellness Council of Louisville. Welcome to our, I think it's fourth or fifth virtual session. It's July 16th, and we're happy to have you joining us. What I'm going to do is ask Patrice Fife, who's one of our co-chairs for programming. She's going to introduce our presenter this morning. So, Patrice, take it away.
Thank you, Matt. And good morning, everyone. Once again, we'd like to welcome you to our July virtual meeting. And today we have a great speaker, one that many of us are familiar with, that is Sir Julius Rhodes. And today we will be talking about it starts with leadership, tips to improve resilience and well-being during uncertain times. And once again, I would like to say thank you for your time, for being here. And I also would like to make the announcements according to our awards chair. And we wanted to let everyone know that the award applications are now available and that those applications are due Friday, August the 21st. So you can get more information about that on our website. We encourage you to visit our website and get more details about our awards application. So without further ado, we would like to turn the session over to Julius. Welcome, Julius.
Patrice, thank you. I appreciate the introduction, and my official title of being knighted as Sir is always welcome to have additional accolades. Matt, thank you as well, and thanks to all of the members of the Committee for the Worksite Wellness Council of Louisville, as well as each of you for taking time out of your day to attend our session. As Patrice mentioned, we're going to be discussing It Starts with Leadership, tips to improve your workforce's resilience and well-being. So with that, let's take a look at our agenda. Today, we're going to be talking about defining, understanding leadership, resilience, well-being, and stress. From there, we'll move on to a discussion around dimensions of wellness and addressing stress. And then finally, understanding what are some of the things that we can do to help our workforce with resilience and well-being during these unprecedented times. And I certainly know that with Mayor Fisher there and Governor Beshear, that as we talked earlier, you guys have done a great job addressing the pandemic situation in Louisville and the state of Kentucky. But all of us, regardless of the location where we're at, have had to deal with this issue, which has really kept us sequestered for the last 12 or 14 weeks. In addition, we've had to deal with any number of other social issues that have taken place, certainly in Louisville with Breonna Taylor and around the country. And so it has really been unprecedented, uncertain, and changing times. And this presentation is designed to perhaps give you some tips to address that from a standpoint of leadership, resilience, and well-being. As Patrice mentioned, I've had a chance to present to the Worksite Wellness Council of Louisville in the past, both in 2018 and 2019. And I'm glad that we are able to keep our streak going by having me be able to present in 2020. And hopefully I'll be able to do so again in 2021 next year when things get back to a more in-person perspective. So for those of you who've seen me present before, you know I never start without talking about the most important part of my life. The name of my business is the MPR Group, and it really addresses and pays homage and tribute to my mom and dad, Marzette and Pete Rhodes. And here's a picture of them taken in 1955. They were married in 1951. Here's a more recent picture of them in 2012 at their 61st wedding anniversary celebration. And then a picture with me, my dad, my mom, and my brother in 2016 as we attended Mass and celebrated Father's Day. Sadly, my dad passed in August of 2019. August the 9th, so we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary, and it has certainly been an even more unusual year for me to not have him in my life, physically in my life, for Father's Day and for the anniversary that he shared with my mom for so many years that we were able to celebrate. But I certainly take with me a lot of the things that he taught me as far as life lessons. I always say, if I could be half the man he was, it'd be a pretty good life. He only had a 6th grade education, one of 17 children born to a single mother in the Mississippi Delta. But the impact that he had on me, that he continues to have on me, will last me for the rest of my life. And it really helps to guide and influence everything I do. From a personal perspective, I've been married to my wife, Linda, for 30 years. We were married 30 years on April 14th of this year. And we have 2 outstanding children, now adults. Here's a picture of us in 2009, a more recent picture of us in 2012. And as you can see from the progression of pictures, you can see Jerome is getting taller, Lauren's growing up, Linda's still looking good. I'm the one that appears to be aging more than anybody else. In 2013, we took this picture. It took me probably about a half hour to get up off the ground after we took that picture. Jerome, at this point in time, has outgrown me. He is 6'7", and he was very happy to have surpassed me in height. And I guess that's kind of the way of the world. And then a even more recent picture of us last year in 2019, when Jerome had a chance to stand up at the wedding of one of his college classmates, a picture of us in Utzberg, Wisconsin, which was a very nice day. Talk about my son for a second. He's a 2-time All-American in track and field at the Milwaukee School of Engineering. He now lives in Portland, Oregon, and works for Adidas, a firm that he wanted to work for ever since he was a small child. So it's always nice to see your children grow up, do well, and live out some of their dreams. My daughter, Lauren, is a 2018 graduate of Millikan University with a degree in Spanish, and she just finished up her first year serving as a residential educator and counselor at Mooseheart School in Batavia, Illinois. And she is currently identifying new opportunities for her as she continues to pursue the world of work. 2 most recent additions to our family, Tina and Annie Mae, and they're up early. They always are pretty close to one another in terms of where they're at in the house. I know that my wife is taking them out for a walk, as she often does, and they kind of know where their bread is buttered. So wherever my wife is, you can pretty much be assured that they'll be close by, because she's the one that more often than not takes them for walks, feeds them, and gives them a lot of cuddle time when they're not cuddling with each other. So thank you for allowing me to share my family with you. Let's take a look again at our agenda. We're going to be defining and understanding leadership, resilience, well-being, and stress. We'll then move on and talk about dimensions of wellness and addressing stress, and then understanding what we can and should do to address all of those dimensions given the unprecedented times that we're living in. And I want to stress at the very beginning that in our roles, we have to be able to display leadership on a consistent basis so that we can become the leaders that we need to be. I often distinguish between leadership and being a leader. And I say leadership is what you do. And we should always expect people to display leadership, from people who are at the ground floor of the organization to people who are at the executive levels. We should always expect people to display leadership and action when action is called for. But the ability to do that consistently, because anybody can do anything once, the ability to do that consistently makes you a leader. It's who you are versus just what you do, and really more accurately, who you are on a consistent basis. So a couple of calibration quotes. The first one coming from Colin Powell, who said, It ain't as bad as you think. Things will look better in the morning. And then the second one coming from Albert Einstein, who said, the world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking. And as you think about where we're at this point in time, think about the end of last year. Think about January of this year. Think about the fact that for years, what employees have said is they want more balance between what they do professionally and what they do personally. And this ideal of virtual or remote work was something that a lot of people talked about as a way of getting some of that balance. And for years, for whatever reason, employers said, no, you know what, we don't see it as a en masse type of an operation. Maybe in isolated situations we can do it, but we don't see it happening en masse. All of a sudden we get to March, we have the outbreak here in the United States where we started to shut things down, and within 4 weeks or so, many, if not all, the employers I know had gone from an in-person physical perspective of being at a brick and mortar facility to being at a virtual or remote situation for their work. And here's what I think is going to happen, and I think we see it happening already, whether it's in our educational institutions or whether it's in our work institutions. What I think we're going to see moving forward is a more hybrid situation where employers or educational facilities won't necessarily require people to be in a physical brick and mortar structure, but they will give them the option as to whether or not they want to come in or whether or not they want to continue to operate from a standpoint of a virtual perspective. So let me ask you a question. How would you respond? And feel free to use your chat function to respond to this question. What's the difference between hearing and listening vis-a-vis showing up and being present? What's the difference between hearing and listening vis-a-vis showing up and being present? So if you could just use your chat function to give me some quick ideas as to how you see those terms either syncing or what you see as the difference between those two terms, I'd appreciate it. And Matt, if you see anything that comes up, if you could share it, I would appreciate that as well. So we always talk about hearing, we always talk about listening. I like to say, unless we have some type of a medical issue, all of us can hear, but do all of us really pay attention? Do all of us really listening? So Matt, are you seeing anything coming up?
Yeah, a couple comments. Hearing and listening, you can't see the body language. This was one comment. Passive versus aggressive. That Lisa was the first comment. Katie, passive versus active. And then Tiffany said being present is actually participating.
I love it.
Tammy says that hearing is a physical action, sound goes in the ear, but listening is active process of hearing, interpreting, and analyzing, responding. Carmen, listening is active with the intent to understand. Well, you know, Julius, you got a smart audience here.
Yeah, very, very astute audience. And the one thing I really like too is when we think about that difference between hearing versus listening, passive versus active, is the ideal I call the music of communication. So the music of communication is the words, the tone, but the body language. And to the extent that we're able to observe that body language, to be able to understand the words, understand the tone, it creates the music of our communication that allows people to dance with us in sync with what that communication is meant to convey. So all the things that you said are absolutely correct. It's participating, it's physical versus active, it's passive versus active. It's moving from a reactive state when we're just hearing to an active state when we're listening. And when I think about it, and I like to say this, it all starts with leadership. Our ability to consistently display those characteristics, those traits that will identify us as a leader to the people with whom we are engaged. So let's move from that discussion of leadership to the issue of resiliency. And we talk a lot about resiliency. So what do we mean? When you hear the word resiliency, what are some of the words, what are some of the phrases that come to mind when you hear the word resiliency? And again, if you can use your chat box to identify some of those terms, and then Matt will share those with us, and then we'll move on from there. And in this day and age, we certainly are getting a lot about resiliency. So Matt, what are we hearing?
Yep, so Marion is saying ability to adapt, Lisa, strength, being able to overcome adversity. I said ability to pivot. Tiffany, being able to adapt to ever-changing circumstances. Alex, able to go with the flow, bounce back. Patrice, endurance against opposition. Tammy, grit, ability to bounce back. Stacy, overcoming. Leslie, recover quickly. So that good sense of the group's thinking.
Yeah, and I want to point out in one quick thing before I share with you some of the things that I've come up with regard to resilience. And Alex, I'm glad you're on the call, and I really appreciate all the help you've given me over the years. Alex said, "Go with the flow." There is a difference between resiliency and endurance, and I want to put it in kind of a football analogy for those of you who like football, and then maybe I'll even move it over to a cooking versus baking analogy. When I was growing up in high school back in the mid 70s, mid to late 70s, people who played football, the coach said, put your head down, drive through the tackle. Put your head down, drive through the tackle. Today, we teach a totally different way of tackling. We teach keep your head up because you shouldn't hit what you can't see. Because if you hit what you can't see, if you hit with your head down, lead with your head, you create a lot of situations where concussions and neck injuries can result. Similarly, when we talk about cooking, I always say there are two types of people in the world: cookers and bakers. Cookers are very creative. You know, when I be in the kitchen with my mom, she'd say, "Oh, you know, just add a pinch of this, add a pinch of that." Bakers are a lot more precise. They can't just go with the flow. They actually, tend to be pretty precise in their measurements because they want to consistently produce the same recipe over and over again. And so that's kind of the difference between resiliency and endurance. When we talk about endurance, it's kind of keep your head down, go with the flow, but resiliency is a lot more of what we heard from other folks in terms of being adaptive. I always say it's the capacity for successful adaptation despite challenging or threatening situations. It's a characteristic that exists in some degree in all of us, and it's normative because it relates to standards of behavior, which again get back to the individual. Further, we can say this about the issue of resiliency, and this came to light in some of the comments that Matt read out. It's a person's ability to remain steady or to bounce back in spite of adversity. And a resilient person really draws upon strengths internally and environmentally to overcome challenges. How many of you remember the old clown punching bag? It was weighted at the bottom. When you were a kid, you had it and you punch it and it'd come back. A lot of people think of resiliency in that way, and I take a little bit of a different approach. Because if you punch that clown punching bag straight on, it would take the blow, it would go straight back, and it would come right back to you. When we talk about being resilient, we talk about having our head on a swivel, being able to see things from the direction in which they're coming so that we can avoid the blow. You have the museum of the greatest boxer of all time, Muhammad Ali, in Louisville, Kentucky. And one of the things he was known for was the ability to see a punch coming, to turn at the very last moment, to avoid that blow while being able to respond in an appropriate manner. So we want to be resilient. We don't want to just take the blow. We want to be able to see the blow coming, and to the extent that we can, avoid the blow, but if we can avoid it, to be able to bounce back quickly. And one of the final things I talk about with regard to resiliency is if we're going to fail, if we're going to get knocked down, we've got to learn how to fail fast or get knocked down and get back up fast to maintain our ability to bounce back in adverse situations. So let me move on and give you a quick resiliency quiz. And this is just designed for you to answer these questions on your own, A, B, or C. In general, how would your best friend describe you? A real gambler. B, willing to take risks after completing adequate research. Or C, cautious. Just in your own mind, how would your best friend describe you? A real gambler. B, willing to take risks after completing adequate research. Or C, cautious. Write down your answer for that. Second question. You're on a TV game show, and how many of us have thought about being on a TV game show? And you can choose one of the following prizes. Which would you take? A, guaranteed $1,000 in cash. B, a 50% chance of winning $5,000. C, a 25% chance of winning $10,000. Or D, a 5% chance at winning $100,000. Which would you take? 1,000, 50% chance at 5,000, 25% chance at 10,000, or the big money prize of 5% chance of winning $100,000. And then C, you have just finished saving for a once in a lifetime vacation. 3 weeks before you plan to leave, you lose your job. What would you do? A, cancel the vacation. B, take a much more modest vacation. C, go as scheduled, reasoning that you need the time to prepare for a job search. Or D, extend your vacation because this might be your last chance to go first class. Now, as you think about where you're at on that spectrum, when you think about resiliency, I also want you to think about the issue of risk. Because the more you're willing to risk, the greater you have to be at understanding and applying concepts of resilience. Now, I'll give you an example of where I'm at on all of those. I'm risk aggressive. If I came with nothing, I'm going to take the chance that if I leave with nothing, I'm no worse off than what I came. So I'm going to go for the 5% chance of winning $100,000. My friends would describe me as a real gambler. And from the vacation perspective, I might just extend my vacation. I certainly am not going to cancel it, and I'm certainly not going to cut back. I'm either going to extend it or I'm going to keep it in its current form. And in fact, that recently happened to me. My wife and I had planned on a 30-year anniversary trip to Paris in April. Well, we all know what happened. We've not canceled our plans. We've pushed them back, and now the EU has said, well, thanks but no thanks. We don't want you here anyway because you've got this big outbreak of COVID that you can't contain. So we still have it on the books. We're hoping to get it in October, but if not October, we'll push it back. But we certainly want to keep that plan as it is, and maybe even try to extend it if we can. But when you think about it, risk and resiliency go hand in hand. The greater the risk, the greater the situation requiring you to be resilient. So know that those two go along hand in hand. The more you're willing to risk, the greater you have to understand and be able to apply situations where you utilize resilience. So when we talk about resilience, it's really part of a social and emotional learning where we work to develop core competencies. And as you look at that list of 6 core competencies, when we look at self-awareness and self-management, social awareness and relationship management, those are the primary tenets of emotional intelligence. And whereas I like to say IQ will get you the job, EQ will get you the promotion. But we've got to add a couple of pieces to that emotional intelligence puzzle that I think a lot of people gloss over or don't really include. One is being able to not just make decisions, but to make responsible decisions and to do it in an enterprise or systems approach, considering where we're at as individuals, also considering where other people are in that chain as well. And then we've got to understand the ability to be empathetic. And I always say there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is where we absolve people of all responsibility because of some catastrophic event. Empathy is where we understand what a person's going through, but we still hold them responsible for the responsibilities that they said they wanted to be a part of. And as a result, we can walk in their shoes. We can feel the pain that they feel because we probably felt it before, but we still understand that they have a responsibility to uphold based upon their desire to want to be a part of something. Matt, any questions that I want to take now, or are we anything coming up that people have a question on?
I do not see any questions.
Okay.
No, so you're good to go.
Great, thanks. And feel free, if you have a question on anything that I'm discussing, to use your chat, and we'll address those as we go along. So if resilience is important to our ability to be a leader and to begin to get into this issue of well-being and stress, what are some of the things we can do to develop resilience? And I say there are 6 things that we can do. First, we want to engage in processes, and processes don't have a start and end point. Processes, by their very definition, are ongoing, and they're subject to feedback, they're subject to revision, but we continue to look at them with the eye of trying to make things better. And we want to engage in processes with an open heart and open mind that allows us to show our vulnerability and to experience new possibilities. And that puts us in a learning zone. So let me try to break that down into a number of different components. Being vulnerable does not make you weak. It makes you human. And to the extent that people see you as human, they're more willing to be vulnerable, to share their human condition with you. And it allows us the opportunity to look at old situations in a new way and to experience new possibilities of how we go about living and resolving the many issues that we face in our lives. And I call that the learning zone. So every day, you have the potential of operating in at least 3 different zones. The comfort zone. That's the area where all of us know the routines, the processes, and the procedures that we undertake. And that might be something as simple as the route you take, or the route you traditionally took, to get from your home to your place of employment. Most of us have a preferred route. It's the one that we know through trial and error works best for us. That's the comfort zone. We also operate in, or should operate in, the learning zone, because we don't get our biggest growth opportunities by staying in an area where we're comfortable. We get our biggest learning opportunities by stepping out of our comfort zone into the learning zone. And the other zone that we operate potentially in is the danger zone. And those are areas where we certainly should not willingly allow ourselves to participate, because they represent situations that can create either harm for ourselves or, more importantly, for the people with whom we engage. The second area that we need to look at with regard to developing resiliency is understand the emotions people are experiencing, because it allows us to connect with ourselves and others. And as Dale Carnegie said, people are not creatures of logic. We're creatures of emotions. In Louisville, you recently had a situation involving the death of Breonna Taylor. And we all, know the situation. No knock warrant. Her significant other assumes someone is breaking in, allegedly fires a gun because he did not know that there were police on the other side executing a no-knock warrant. As a result, Ms. Taylor, who was I believe an EMT or paramedic in the area, gets shot and gets killed. How do you address that? How do you begin to connect with yourself and other people? It is to understand the emotions that people are experiencing. And the way we understand the emotions that people are experiencing is not to first ask them, how you feeling? Because that kind of puts people on a defensive. What we want to do, I believe, is to share where we're at with regard to a situation. And again, share with people our human condition, our vulnerability, our opportunity to experience new possibilities, and then to ask them, would they like to share how they're feeling, or what emotions are they going through at this point in time. The third thing we want to do is be able to listen and act with empathy, and that should be a constant, regardless of what we're doing, how we're doing. Our ability to connect with people on an empathetic basis is something that we should always do. The fourth thing I talk about is that we need to know, what do we need to be curious about? And that gets us into current learning, but also planning for the future. What are the things that are happening currently, but also what are the things that are on the horizon? And I always say there's a difference between sight and vision. Sight is what's immediately available to us. Vision is the ability to look beyond what's immediately available to us, past the horizon, to see what's coming down the pike so that we can plan for that. And it aids in our ability to be resilient, to anticipate things that might be coming our way. The fifth thing that we want to do is understand what stories are people transmitting. And that gets us into the issue of understanding what are facts versus what is fear. And I oftentimes say fear is fantasy experienced as reality. One of the things that I often ask people to understand and to do is, with regard to understanding the stories that people are transmitting, is you can't lock in on one set of data, one set of information. Let's take it from a standpoint of our local news. Here in Chicago, we have ABC, NBC, CBS, WGN, Fox, just like I'm sure you have in Louisville, a number of different outlets. Those outlets can be either primarily Democratic, primarily Republican, but what you also need to do is to expose yourself to different news outlets. So I listen to BBC because I want the international view of what's happening here in the United States. I listen to PBS. NBC LX is a new service that is targeted towards millennials that gives you more of a deeper opportunity to look at news stories without the kind of the 30-second, 45-second coverage that we get through traditional media. So I listen to NBC LX. So all of those things give me a different perspective, or allow me to compare and contrast things that I'm getting, so that I can really look at the information I'm receiving and put more than just one set of data behind it to build my knowledge base based upon the information that I receive. And I always say we want to be informed consumers of information and not people who rely on a soundbite. The final thing I talk about is identify key learnings. What's working and what's not working, and to begin to put that into the mix in terms of our ability to understand when things are going well, when things are not going well, so that we can act appropriately and make course corrections. And that gives us that opportunity, if you go back up to point one, to show our vulnerability, but also to experience new possibilities. When you think about leadership, being a leader, and resilience, I like to say it's all wrapped up in our ability to consistently display our personal brand. And from a perspective of personal branding, I talk about it as an unfair advantage that each of us has by capturing the value of our personal characteristics, attributes, and life experience. We are taking what we possess and we're in the process of creating that as a tangible asset that we package and that we effectively communicate to our audience, leveraging the specific use value that comes from our unique value proposition, those intrinsic talents that we have. And I always say to people, when you go to apply for a job, it's not you against anybody else. It's really you against yourself and the objective standard that's been set for that job, because really there's no one else like you. And I like to add this piece to the puzzle. There will always be people greater and lesser than you. So what we need to stop doing is comparing ourselves to others and collaborating with others, which allows us to extend our scope of influence so that we can be of better service to the people around us. And life's most persistent question, as Dr. Martin Luther King put it, is what are we doing to be of service to others? And in that regard, when we talk about our brand, your brand has to convey three things: standards, those things that denote excellence; values, closely held beliefs that guide behavior consistently. Again, anybody can do anything once. The question is, can you do it consistently? And then finally, what's our unique selling, or more appropriately, what's our unique value proposition? And Matt, I'm gonna pick on you for a second. I'm gonna ask you a quick question. You're married, correct, sir?
Yes, I am.
And how long have you been married?
25 years.
25 years. And your wife's name is?
Cindy.
Cindy. So I'm gonna tell you exactly how you used your unique value proposition to convince Cindy to marry you. You walked up to her, you saw her, you walked up to her, you said, "Hey, I'm Matt Schwartz, how you doing?" She said, "Doing all right." Then you said, "Cindy, you're gonna marry me." Isn't that the way it happened?
It was close. I don't know if you really want the story. I don't think you want to derail on that, but no. Cindy lived in an apartment, or like a house that I used to live in, and I went back to get my mail, and I kept going back. So just a little persistence, a little bit of resiliency.
Absolutely. And you know what happened as you went back? When you first went back, you said to yourself, "Wow, that's a nice young lady. I'd like to get to know her a little bit better." She saw you and she said, "Wow, seems like a nice young man. I'd like to get to know him a little bit better." So each time you came back, there wasn't an objection as to why you're still coming back. But each time you went back, you began to share a little bit more about who you were. She began to share a little bit more about who she was. And over time, you began to ask people, "Hey, I met this young lady. Her name is Cindy. She seems like a really nice person. I think you know her. Can you share something?" She probably did the same thing with some friends that the two of you probably had in common. And over time, you were able to consummate those back and forth engagements by a proposal, and she said yes. But she said yes because in your standards, she saw someone who displayed excellence. In your values, she saw someone who had closely held beliefs that guided behavior consistently. And she knew that there was no one else like you, just like you knew there was no one else like her. So both of you were able to deduce from that this is the type of person whose personal brand makes me feel good enough that I want to continue the relationship and ultimately wind up in marriage. When you think about your personal brand, a couple things. One, not everybody who wants to be associated with your personal brand should you allow to be associated with your personal brand, because they may not see or desire the same things from you that you develop in your personal brand. Classic example, Michael Vick, dog fighting. He wasn't able to disconnect from friends in his past life, not saying disassociate, because you can still recognize people without funding them. And he chose to fund them. And, you know, when it was time for the rubber to meet the road and the authorities asked, you know, did Michael Vick fund you? Michael thought that they would say no and they would take the rap. Well, one thing we always know, if there's a choice between me or you going to jail and the police are asking me, it's never going to be me. It's always going to be you. And they flipped on Michael quicker than you flip a hot pancake in a skillet. So not everyone who should be associated with your brand should you allow to associate with your brand. So now let's transition a little bit and talk about well-being and stress. And when you think about well-being, when you think about stress, certain things come to mind. So I'm going to ask you again to use your chat feature to identify what are some of the things that come to mind when you think about well-being and stress. What are some of the words, some of the verbiage that comes to mind when you think about well-being and stress? So you can go ahead and write into your chat feature, and Matt will share with us as appropriate what people come up with regard to well-being and stress, some words, some terms that come to mind when you think about defining well-being and stress.
All right, don't tell me everybody went. There we go. Okay, we got a little. They were just thinking. So let's see. Leslie says employee assistance programs. Carmen, balance. Donna, demand, exceed resources. Sarah, mindfulness. Lisa, well-being, living life fully. Tiffany, well-being equals self-care. Stress to me is the uncertainty of the pandemic we're facing today.
Give me that one again, Matt, the last one.
Well-being equals self-care. Stress to me is the uncertainty of the pandemic we're facing today. Lisa, stress can be good or bad. Which actually reminds me, interesting, I just read something where they were talking about, there was a study that showed, I think it was in England, that if you think stress is harmful to you, it will be. If you think it's helpful to you, it will be. Which I thought was really interesting because it's totally about perspective.
Yeah, it kind of gets to that old quote from Henry Ford that said, whether you believe you can achieve a thing or not, you're probably right. And that whole ideal of a self-fulfilling prophecy, if we believe something's going to happen, it probably is. So thanks for sharing. Thanks for giving your input. When we think about well-being, it's the experience of health, happiness, and prosperity. And it includes, and it's very important that we include the concept of good mental health, high life satisfaction, and a sense of meaning or purpose in the ability to manage stress. And one of the things I heard that I liked was this ideal of balance. Balance is vitally important to everything we do. In fact, I always say without it, you can't do anything, or if you can, it's just a lot more difficult. When we talk about stress, it's a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. And to someone's point, it can be either positive in the case of eustress or negative in the case of distress. Often when we think about stress, we think about it in a negative. We think about it in terms of our ability to do something is exceeded, our ability to do something doesn't match up with the resources. So we're asked to do something more than what we believe we're capable of being able to do based upon the available resources. Now, let's take a look at the wheel of wellness, because the wheel of wellness is something that is out there in the public domain. I'm sorry, Matt, did you say something?
No.
Okay.
No, somebody got it. I'm going to make sure. Yeah, no, it was not me.
Okay, so the wellness wheel is out there in the public domain, and it looks at wellness on 8 different dimensions: environmental, occupational, physical, financial, recreational, social, mental, and spiritual. And by spiritual, I don't necessarily mean religious. I mean having a belief system, a core belief system that you act upon in your daily life. And it could also mean spiritual from a religious standpoint. But what I want you to do is I want you to, from 1 to 10, with 1 being low and 10 being high, I want you to write down where you're at on each of those dimensions. So for environmental, just do E and then a number. For occupational, O, then a number. Physical, P, and a number, so forth and so on. And when you get to social, that's S, and spiritual, you can just put SP. So just take a quick moment, identify where you're at with regard to each of those 8 dimensions, 1 being low, 10 being high. And just your first quick read, don't try to, overthink it now. I'll ask you to come back to it later. As I look at this wheel, here's how I interpret it. 1 to 4 is kind of low. 5 to 7 is in the middle, and 8 to 10 is high. That's how I interpret it. You may interpret it differently, but that's my read. Now, as you look at where you're at on the wheel of wellness, on the wellness wheel, I want you to think about this. Regardless of whether you're in a 1 to 4, a 5 to 7, or an 8 to 10, each of those numbers represents an opportunity for improvement. If you're at a 10, and it's hard to be at a 10, but if you're at a 10, you want to stay at a 10. So what's your plan? If you're at a 1 or between a 1 to 4 and you're low, what's your plan? How are you going to move further along that continuum so that you enjoy a greater satisfaction from the things that encompass the different parts of your life? Now, when you do this, this is your self-assessment. The thing I want you to come back to is I want you to share it with someone that you have a relationship with, someone that you trust, and you say, hey, I took this assessment. This is self-assessment. This is wellness wheel, scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high. And here's kind of how I rated myself. How would you rate me? And the more you can get feedback from people, the more opportunity you have to develop an accurate action plan that allows you to move in a way that you want to move in terms of increasing your satisfaction on each of those areas. So let's continue to move forward and talk about stress. Again, there are 2 types of stress. Distress is negative stress. It's a term that's used to describe negative situations. An example might be the one we're most commonly associated with stress, such as financial issues, or now the COVID-19 pandemic. It certainly has caused a lot of stress. There's eustress, which is beneficial, can be either mental or physical, psychological or physical. An example would be a challenging work assignment that is perceived as neither too difficult nor too easy, but it requires you to stretch. Or it could be a strength training workout or some physical exercise routine that you've begun to engage in. But when we think about wellness, well-being, our opportunity to address issues of eustress as well as distress, there's some essential well-being traits that we have to have as part of our makeup. First and foremost is a strong sense of personal responsibility. And I always say you're 100% accountable and responsible for you. And you're 50%, at least 50% accountable and responsible for any relationship that you engage in. The second thing with regard to essential well-being traits is that we need a realistic and positive outlook. And I remember working for General Electric back in the late 80s. And there was a gentleman, and so I got to Louisville quite a bit because Appliance Park was there and I worked in the appliance division. A gentleman who headed up sales by the name of Chuck Wagner in our central region. And Chuck would always say, Enthusiasm sells, and nothing sells like enthusiasm. And he was right to a point. That enthusiasm has to be sincere. It has to be realistic, because if it isn't, it comes across as being artificial. So we have to have a realistic and positive outlook. And when you think about it, the situation that we're involved in now with the pandemic, have we had other pandemics happen, not in our lifetime, but have they happened in the United States? And of course they have. I believe it was 1914, the flu pandemic, which killed over 600,000 people in a 2 to 3 year period. So essentially 200,000 people a year over a 3 year period. Did we come out of it? Yes. Are we hearing things with regard to a vaccine that might allow us to mitigate the issues around COVID? Yes, we are. So we have to inform ourselves and be realistic and positive that, yes, even though this is something that none of us have gone through in our lifetime, we have to be realistic. We have to understand the role that we can play in helping to address it. And based upon the information that we're receiving, we have to assure ourselves that things will get better, because they will. And I would certainly rather live in a situation that I believe things will get better, because going back to Matt's analogy and the information that he saw from a study in Britain, if you believe that things will get better, if you believe in a positive outcome, you'll achieve a positive outcome. If you believe in a negative outcome, you'll achieve a negative outcome. And then finally, we need to take time to identify new experience in life and discoveries, to really be aware of the things that are around us. And I like to call that being safe under stress. And by safe, I mean there are 5 things that I think we should do when we're sensing stress. 1, we should stop, take a breath, and focus on mindful breathing. And that was one of the things that came up in definitionally, mindfulness. So there's a couple of different ways of doing it. There's the 5-10-10 way of mindful breathing, which says you breathe in through your nose for 5 seconds, exhale through your mouth for 10, and you do that 10 times. What I like to do is take my right hand, put it over my heart, my left hand over my diaphragm, close my eyes, focus on that kind of that third eye, take deep breaths, slow, controlled breaths, and focus on the beating of my heart and the movement of my diaphragm, because it slows me down. It allows me to kind of regain control of my faculties, regain control over the moment in time that I'm in now, and get more centered. The second thing is to affirm and focus on the positive. What are the things that you can control? Because a lot of times when you focus on things that are out of your control, it diverts your attention and takes you away from achieving a beneficial result. The third thing, pardon me, is to ask, what small changes can I make that will yield long-term gains? Small changes made over time yield long-term results. Fourth, to focus. And don't try to do or be everything to everybody. The final thing is, once you've stopped, affirmed, asked, and focused, is to begin the process of executing your strategy. We also want to be able to clear our head. And there are a few things I offer as ways to clear your head. First of all, understand it's okay not to be okay. The things that we're facing now are unprecedented in their scope, both from a health perspective, from a social perspective, from an education, from a police reform, from a political perspective. Just about everything you're looking at now is in a state of flux. So it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to allow yourself that opportunity to feel that way, but you can't stay stuck in that way. You have to be able to let go of small things. Engage in positive self-talk. That's the ideal, that you should be able to say to yourself, what are the things that allow me to feel confident and comfortable in my abilities? And you should do that on a daily basis. Fourth, notice the 4 S's: sight, sound, smells, and sensation. Those things that can or should give us pleasure and delight in those. Next, I talk about visualizing your desired outcome. And great athletes, great leaders talk about not just working to get to an outcome, but understanding and visualizing what that desired outcome looks like. Next, we talk about making sure that you take in each sensation and identify what makes it pleasurable. Pay attention to the simple things. It's not the big things in life, but it's the small things, the simple things over time that really give us pleasure. Again, identify small changes you can make. And then the final thing I'll offer you is this: savor the only moment over which you have control, which is now, and be mindful of the point in time that you're in now. We're getting close to the end. How do you improve your connection with others, not just those in your workforce, but in general, others? And I'll point to a couple of things. One, we want to normalize the process. We want to continue to provide opportunities for things to remain as scheduled on time. We want to show people the connection to the bigger picture, our mission, our visions, our values, and guiding principles. They're more important now than ever. We need to identify ways to connect with people as people and not just do it once, but to be able to replicate it consistently. And then finally, communicate, communicate, communicate. I don't ever believe there's a situation where we can over communicate. And particularly during this point in time where we're having to do more virtually, it's vitally important that we communicate in any way we can, because we're really losing the opportunity to engage people on those three dimensions I talked about earlier: tone, words, and body language. You can see a little bit of what I'm doing from a body language perspective, but for the majority of you who are out there, I have no idea from a body language perspective how this is setting on you. So, how do we increase well-being as well as opportunities for eustress or positive stress? Have fun. Take time to relax and enjoy yourself. And I oftentimes say this: we shouldn't be afraid to do things that we did when we were a kid that brought us joy. So one of the things I like to do, and people think it's crazy, I like what I call rain ball. And rain ball is, I love playing basketball. I have a hoop in my backyard, but I particularly enjoy playing basketball outside when it's raining, when there's a light drizzle coming down, and just going out and playing in the rain. I did it yesterday, and not because I knew I was going to be on this presentation, but because I like doing it. It's something that gives me joy. The second thing I talk about is putting yourself in a positive environment. Good people, people who are role models in your social life, in your professional life. And the fact that we're separated via what I like to call proximity distancing as opposed to social distancing, because we're social creatures by nature. We crave the opportunity to engage with others, but we should be applying appropriate proximity distancing, 6 feet or so, and then other protocols. But put yourself in a positive environment. We are reopening. Kentucky is reopening. Illinois, Chicago is reopening. We are having the opportunity to get back out in Chicago and walk on the lakefront, to go out and have a meal appropriately with other folks, and take the opportunity to take advantage of that. Third, I talked about it earlier, be an informed consumer and not just a receiver of information. Identify, accept, and act on facts and not fiction and not fear. And then practice proximity distancing, not social distancing, because we are by nature social creatures. So I wanted to also provide you with a couple of well-being resources. I particularly like number 2, calming resources from Stop, Think, Breathe, which kind of gets back to that whole issue I mentioned about being safe under stress and stopping, asking, affirming, focusing, and then engaging. There's a crisis text line if you're having any issues, and someone mentioned the opportunity to take advantage of an EAP. This is something similar. TED Talks, there are a lot of great things on TED Talks. Greater Good magazine comes from the University of California at Berkeley. And then BU is another magazine online that you can pick up great tips and articles on well-being, wellness, and resilience. And then provide a couple of opportunities for COVID resources. Certainly, the U.S. Department of Labor is there, the Center for Disease Control, and the World Health Organization, which certainly has gotten a lot of news in our country recently because of the administration's desire to pull out of the World Health Organization, which is something that can't happen until June of 2021. And hopefully by then we will have come to a realization that the WHO, the World Health Organization, is a viable opportunity for us to leverage learning from this organization in other countries, and we'll continue to be a part of it because I think it is certainly another opportunity for us. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming out today, for spending some time with us. I hope you found the conversation beneficial, and I'm going to open it up for an opportunity to ask questions. And so, Matt, if you want to open the floor up and ask people if they have any questions, I'm certainly willing to entertain any questions at this point in time.
Okay, great. Julius, thank you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a 10-second warning that I'm going to unmute all phones. So again, if you've got your own personal stresses going on in the background or whatever noise, if you don't want it to be heard, make sure that your phone or computer is muted because I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody. And then we'll just allow, if you have any questions, we'll be able to have an open conversation for a few minutes. So here we go. So everybody is, from my perspective, unmuted. If you'd like to say something, make sure that your device is unmuted and go ahead and speak up.
Chris Jones, what you got for me?
This has been a wonderful conversation. I would love to continue to hear more about what you've discussed today, and I'm just excited to be on the call. So thank you for this opportunity, and I will definitely reach out to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. Just one quick thing for me. You see this slide here. It has up my website information, which is mprgroup.info. If you get a chance, if you want to go to that website, you can sign into my guest book and leave a comment, good, bad, or indifferent, as to how you felt about the presentation. It's always good for me to get feedback, and I would appreciate any of you who would go to that website and leave a comment in my guest book. Any other questions or comments? Alex, you still out there?
I am. Let me put myself on mute.
Good to see your name. Good to see you. I hope you're doing well.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I think this was really timely, and I think a lot of our HR and wellness folks are going to be able to use this within their organization. So always appreciate getting to see you and have you come back to the council each year. So just big thank you from all of us.
You're welcome. Thank you. Woo, woo, woo. Arnett, are you out there?
I am, Julius. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to hear your voice. Thanks for all your help over the years.
Oh, you're so kind. You are just such a welcome presence today, and we thank you for this information. It's been absolutely, like she said, timely. So thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hey, Julius, it's Tiffany.
Hey, Tiffany.
How are you?
I'm well. Good to hear your voice.
I just wanted to share. I really like
a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I really like that worksite wellness wheel to give us, just a little self-thought on that. I really thought that was helpful because when I look at the scores I put down, I'm like, maybe I'm not doing as great as
And so that's my point. I mean, as you think about where we're at today, unprecedented, trying, uncertainty, confusion, conflicting information coming out. So it's natural to, not really know if you're looking at it in an appropriate manner. Remember the thing I said earlier, it's okay not to be okay. So look at it today, put it away, come back to it in a day or so. And then after you come back to it, ask yourself, who are the people that I have a relationship with, that I value their input, and allow them to give you some input. And then once you've begun to collect input from other people, go back and reassess. And then, you know, as a further tool, let's say on the social scale, and on the social scale, a lot of us are probably a lot less today than where we were 4 months ago, where we were back in January, February. What are the things I can do to increase my social wellness? And write out pros and cons. What are the pros? What are the cons? And then begin to see how you can implement that into a plan of action to increase not only where you might be on the social scale, but financial, environmental. It really is a tool that lends itself to a number of different applications. But I think for me, the first one is to take it, to put it away, reassess it from a self perspective, and then begin to share with other people. And then after you've done that, to write out a list of things that will allow you to see the pros and cons, and further develop and refine a plan of action that will either allow you to stay in that 8, 9, 10 category, or will move you further along, depending on where you're at in that continuum on those other categories. Does that kind of help?
It does. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you what, so any other questions or comments that anybody wants to make in the closing moment? I'm going to make this the last opportunity.
And again, if there's anything that I can do for anyone, you'll have all my contact information. I consider all of you valuable to me, and certainly if I can be a resource in any way, I'm happy to do it.
Also,
Hey,
sorry,
Matt.
just a couple of, yes.
Can I make my announcement real quick, if that's okay with you?
Please.
Okay, so obviously with the state of the world right now, things are a little unsure, and we have made the decision to not have an in-person conference this year. It was very hard to make that choice, but I think it's going to be the safest for all of our people that are involved within the council. So we will still be having a conference. It's just going to be moved to a virtual platform, which we're working out all the details with that right now. It will be a lot shorter of a day. We're hoping to still have a speaker, and the awards will be a part of that. Still looking into all of the things on what everything's going to be looking like, but we will be sending out more information about that soon. And it will be on the same date, so September 24th. It's a Thursday. So we're hoping that everyone will still be able to make it. It's just going to look a little bit different this year, like everything else currently.
Well, thank you, Alex. And yeah, I mean, part of it is just the reality that there's still companies who are not allowing their employees to go to live events. And so it's just part of it's a reality, and we'll navigate. You know, we're going to be resilient, Julius, if that's all right. We're gonna pivot and deal.
Absolutely.
So listen, well, again, we appreciate everybody joining this morning. Julius, it's certainly a pleasure to see you. Hope Chi-Town is you're staying safe and your family's staying safe. And again, we're going to wish everybody a great rest of the week and a good weekend. And thank you so much for joining us.
And I got one more quick thing. I'm going to send to you, Matt, and you can share with all of the members of the council and others an article I authored on racial inequity, and creating a psychologically safe workplace that you can feel free to use. And finally, I developed a new presentation called "I Need a Kick in the A," the letter A, that's coming out, and look forward to that coming out. And I'll be doing that as a webinar, so I'll share some information with all of you on that at some point in the future. But I'll get the article out to you to share with others, Matt, in the next few minutes.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you, Julius. Thanks to all of you for joining. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll sign off now. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.